I have our Mexican flag on the wall. I'm the patriot around here.
Yeah, but whose Mexican flag is that, Kurt? Who did it belong to?
Oh, now it's a bad look because I took it from you.
I mean, I wasn't going to say it.
Somebody cut this out and edit. Stop the podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to Unbelievable, the podcast where I tell my good friend Kurt two unbelievable facts from history. But here's the catch. One of them's true, one of them's fake.
And I got to try to guess which one's which.
That's right. I am former immigrant Luis Mejia, joined here by future immigrant Kurt Danner. So here's the deal. Kurt and I were roommates not too long ago for some time. And, you know, some could say we are current lovers, future enemies, current lovers. Really, it's up to you to decide. The point is, we know each other very well. We know how to lie to one another. And that is what I'm going to be trying to do here today. But before we get started, since I'm going to be taking over the show this week, I want Kurt to give me a quick little fun fact just to get our minds calibrated for what the truth is. So why don't you give us a quick fast fire fact for us, Kurt, to get us started?
All right, I got one ready here. So, true or false? After the building of the Taj Mahal was completed, Shah Jahan had the hands of all the workers cut off so they could never build something similar.
Ooh. I like this because it feels like it's something I could have read about 10 years ago in omgfacts.com. But I'm not sure. I just have that gut feeling. And that's a good gut feeling for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say false.
It is false. I think it's commonly told. There's also a similar myth that he had their eyes gouged out, but neither one of these are true.
You know, in a way that kind of makes me upset just knowing that this didn't happen because, you know, sometimes you want to believe that history is just this insane, right? So, you know, luckily that's why we have this show to really prove that sometimes these stories are
That's
true.
what you're rooting for, Luis? For all these poor people getting their hands cut off? Just for building a really cool building?
I mean, look, what's wrong with a little bit more vogue, a little bit more chic in your life, right? Let's spice it up. Spice it up.
Little sprinkle of drama, some severed hands, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's a severed hand here or there, right? I think we can
That's
all
true.
agree on that.
That's true. That's what sweet grandmama used to always say.
You know, and listen, Kurt, none of what we say in this podcast is legally binding, so whatever.
We cannot be held accountable in court for our podcast.
Right. Your Honor, it was just a hand. All right, Kurt. Well, I have a couple of stories for you, and you know, it's really fun because I think we're working on a theme today.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so both of the stories I'm going to be telling you today are actually going to be based on the Aztec Empire. And I don't know if you knew this, Kurt, but the day that we're recording this, which is the 4th of March, the first Friday of March, is considered to be the Olmec, the pre-Hispanic New Year,
okay.
Right? It's this wonderful day when supposedly a portal opens between a different separate dimension and ours, which allows all these different energies to transpire between these worlds, and people do rituals and clean their souls, purify their spirits, stuff like that.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that's why this episode is going to have a bit of a theme for both of my stories. So considering all this background, all this historical and cultural context, you could say, we are going to be focusing on two stories from the Aztec Empire, which, as we know, is really a bit of an anachronistic name. So I'm going to be talking about the Mexica people, really.
Or the Triple Alliance.
Yes, that's
so
right.
I've heard.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, it seems like you learned something listening to this show.
I've learned from my mistakes. I'm not getting canceled again.
Right. So just keep in mind that if I do use Mexica or Aztec or Triple Alliance, know that I'm referring to the people that were in power in what we now know as Mexico during the time of the Spanish's arrival. All right? All right. So let's get started. Now, we are going to take it back to the arrival of the Spanish in what is now considered Mexico. So I'm going to take you back to 1520. The Spanish are just arriving in Mexico.
Boo.
Yeah, boo. Exactly. So the Spanish are already here. They've been here for around a year. They arrived in 1519, and Mexico Tenochtitlan, which we now know as Mexico City, would not fall until 1521. So we're right in the middle of the Spanish conquest of Mexico before it became New Spain, okay?
Okay.
Now, Hernan Cortez is in Mexico, Tenochtitlan. He's grown acquainted with not just the people that live there, the Mexica people, but also with their leader, which at this point is Moctezuma II, the great Moctezuma we hear about all the time. He's become friends with them and is now trying to find a way to establish himself as the dominant power in this part of the world. So he's, again, like I said, grown acquainted with the people, made alliances with some tribes that are a little discontent with Moctezuma, and he's trying to really acquire all of the treasures of this land. Now, Moctezuma is still alive. He's just imprisoned, right? So there's a general peace going on in Tenochtitlan for the time being. Now, Hernan Cortez has to go out for some dealings, right? So he leaves his first in command, his right-hand man, Pedro Alvarado, in charge.
But now the parents are away. Time for a little revolution. All right.
Yeah, I mean, basically, right? So all hell breaks loose, right? The Mexica do a ritual that the Spanish don't like.
Ooh.
And Pedro de Alvarado gets really upset and essentially massacres half the town.
Oh, no. I feel bad for joking about it.
It's okay, Kurt. I kind of let you, I strayed you down the wrong path here. Don't even worry. That's on me if you get canceled. But essentially, in short, the tensions between the Mexica people and the Spanish are on the rise.
Okay.
Right? And because, I mean, of course, you had this period of relative peace, of this interregnum, you could call it. And now you go ahead and massacre the whole town, right? So, or not the whole town, but half the town. Of course, the Mexica are incensed, right? They're angry. So they start preparing for a battle against the Mexica that are really unhappy that the Spanish are here, you know?
The last time my guy Pedro gets to babysit, that's not happening again. I'll tell you that.
yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. So the Spanish are now fearing a bit of an insurrection, so they start to leave the city in order to prepare for a battle that may be incoming, right? And as they're leaving, the Mexica plan a surprise attack on the Spanish side, and they burn the bridge they're leaving on. Yeah, and it's tragic. It's terrible. This results in heavy losses for the Spanish side because, the bridge falls into the water.
Right.
And this results in 600 dead on the Spanish side, both Spain people or indigenous people that sided with the Spanish, yeah?
So this is seen as a loss for the Spaniards?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this is considered the biggest loss, military loss in Hernan Cortez's career, right? And it's reported that it was so bad that once this was all done, he counted the dead, he sat down by a tree and just started crying.
He had a rough day.
yeah, you could say that. Yeah, really, honestly.
You needed a little me time.
Yeah, just a little me time after half of your forces are gone, yeah. And all this from what he considered an inferior fighting force, which that's on him for thinking that.
True.
There's a quote from one of the people that was there alongside him. His name was Francisco Lopez de Gómara, which says, Cortez, seeing all this pain, stood up and without pause went to a tree and began to cry. He thought about the dead and the living that remained. He thought about Tlaxcala and Moctezuma and the treasures they held that were now lost. All of this so overwhelming that he did not cease his crying. This is what Francisco de Gómara, his conquistador at the time, says of him. So yeah, Hernan Cortez has had a bad day, but it doesn't stop there, because imagine, if you're an army and you witness your main general cry,
oh no.
Well, that's certainly like a bit discouraging,
Not
right?
great for morale,
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, not great for morale at all. And the thing is, Hernan Cortez knew this. So
Never let them see you cry.
you're right. What he did was that he started telling his troops that they all needed to cry along with him and told them that anyone unaffected by the battle was subject to trial and death.
Wow, he flipped it on them. He said, this isn't a big deal to you guys?
Right. So he essentially said, hey, we just had a terrible loss. You all should grieve or mourn your dead, right?
Right.
And if you don't, well, that's unpatriotic, right? And that's actually treason. So we're all going to sit right here and we're all going to sit in a circle and talk about it, right?
We're going to have some me time.
Yeah, exactly.
He whipped out the Uno reverse card on them.
Yeah, really? Yeah, he did. And he mandated crying for all his troops, mind you, both Spanish and natives. And this night is actually known collectively in the history of Mexican culture as the Sad Night. And reportedly, some people are actually killed because of this.
What is it known as in Spanish? Because I feel like it's gonna sound way better than the Sad Night.
No, it actually doesn't sound any better, right?
Oh no.
In Spanish, it's actually just called La Noche Triste.
Oh no.
Which just translates to the sad night. Yeah. So, as I was saying, some people were reportedly killed for not crying. Yeah, for not being mournful enough and not joining their comrades in mourning the death of like 600 people. Right. One of his generals, his name was Pánfilo de Narváez. Actually, as soon as they arrived in the shores of the New World, he immediately fell in love with the people, the culture, the language, etc. He really grew so acquainted with the locals, of the Mexica locals. And it's written that when he arrived in Mexico, Tenochtitlan, he fell in love with everything, the culture, traditions, and it actually writes the women, right? And he really sympathized with the story of these people that really did nothing more than just be living in their land when these people arrived, right? Which is a story we've heard countless times before, yeah.
If they didn't want to be invaded, they should have thought of that before they had gold, okay?
That's true. That's true. Anyway, so Pánfilo saw this as a sign of weakness from the Spanish and as an opportunity for the Mexica to finally rise up against their oppressors and do something once and for all, take over their land back. So, of course, he cried along with his general. He didn't want to, end up killed.
Right.
So at night, when no one was looking, he gathered a few of his men, which were also sympathetic to the Mexica cause, and snuck into Mexico Tenochtitlan, right? And since they were Spanish, they were able to go back in with no issue, and they actually went into Moctezuma's cell that he was imprisoned in and said, hey, man, look, Hernan Cortez is weak. His whole army is crying. Now's your chance to strike back. He tells him, hey, look how much emotional stress, just turmoil you have caused on them just by burning a bridge. Just imagine what kind of a decisive blow you could make to their psyche if you just, surprise attack them now and force them out of your country.
Not that I'm rooting for the Spanish, but this man did see Hernan Cortez crying and thought, great time to kill this man. Perfect time for murder.
Yeah. I mean, look, you have to think in his shoes for a sec, right? If you murder the big man in town, well, this is an opportunity for you to, just kind of step in.
Yeah, he wants to be in charge.
Right, yeah, all of these things, like most things in history, they're never black and white.
Right.
Yeah, they're all shades of gray, 50, if you will. So Moctezuma agrees and says, okay, I'm in. I'm going to go ahead and get all the remainder of my army to have
get
and
all
go
the homies
with
together.
Right. Get the band back together so that we can go stab the Spanish in the back, right? Or rather have, Pánfilo de Narváez stab his homies in the back, right? Now, we're going to take a quick break and hard cut back to the Mexica and Spanish encampment. Yeah. Meanwhile, back at camp. Everyone's crying. So Hernan Cortez, regardless of what your thoughts are on him or how history remembers him as fondly or as bad, that's up to you.
Me or the people listening to this? Just the general populace?
I'd rather you not answer that question, Kurt, out of respect for, our friendship.
Oh, come on, Luis. I'm a Montezuma boy all the way.
Don't worry, Kurt. I know where your allegiances lie, right?
I have our Mexican flag on the wall. I'm the patriot around here.
Yeah, but whose Mexican flag is that, Kurt? Who did it belong to?
Oh, now it's a bad look because I took it from you.
I mean, I wasn't going to say it. So.
Somebody cut this out and edit. Stop the podcast.
Anyway, he was so Hernan Cortez. Regardless of your thoughts on him, he was a brilliant general. I mean, let's think about it. He conquered the whole entire territory that is now Mexico in what, 3 years? That's insane.
Right.
So there's some sort of method to the madness. Like there's a reason he's remembered, right? So now his crying is reported by both Francisco de Gómara, the man I talked about earlier, and also this man called Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who was also along with him for the conquest of Mexico. They reported that his crying, and this was, of course, reported in subsequent reports of the conquest of Mexico, they reported that his crying was actually a tactical move.
Okay.
He didn't use his scrying as a way to show that he was mournful and sad.
Okay.
Which is what everyone was thinking in his camp, but rather as a strategic way to earn himself and his troops safe passage away from Mexico, Tenochtitlan. They would come across these Mexica encampments, and as they would go past, the Mexica would see this defeated, sad army. And as they were going through, the scrying army would appeal to the sensibilities, to the emotions of the Mexica encampments so that they could continue to have passage further away from the city without risk of attack. But really, what he was doing was finding a way to regroup with his troops that were still in the shores of Veracruz to find a way to resupply, get arms, armor, munitions, etc., so that they could prepare for a counterattack.
Okay, so it's saying that he cried and then had his army cry with him to lower morale, so they would look more pitiful?
No. So really what they were doing, it was not for the army itself, but for anyone that was on the outside looking
So the
in.
army's supposed to be in on it too then? That they're
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
So the army just thought like, oh, boo-hoo, our general's crying, he will kill us.
Right.
So let's just pretend we're sad, right? This was just a way for them to feign sadness, but for a strategic purpose.
I just keep thinking like, what if this man just had a big cry moment and then
Maybe.
afterwards he's like, hey, that was a bad look. I should come up with an excuse. And we're retreating anyway,
Yeah,
so it works
but you know
out.
what? Look, regardless of what he was thinking at the time, he did this as a strategic purpose to make sure he got through.
He said, it's my conquest and I'll cry if I want to.
Right. Hernan Cortez, 1520. Side note, do you think Hernan Cortez would have just a fire mixtape if he at this point, 1520, had access to SoundCloud?
You think he had the good beats, the bangers?
Oh no, he would definitely not be good at making beats, Kurt. Anyway,
Interesting.
Anyway, so that happens. Hernan Cortez regroups with his troops from the coast, gets his weapons, and now he has to devise some sort of plan to reattack Tenochtitlan and take over the city. So he gets word that Pánfilo de Narváez has betrayed him. Somehow he gets word.
Right.
And that he has Moctezuma's remainder army to essentially kick him out of Mexico.
Give him the big bonk.
Yeah, force them out of Mexico by bonking is the technical term.
Right.
Yeah. Hernan Cortez gets a hold of this information and decides what's the best strategy to attack Moctezuma's army, and he decides to wait for them now that he's in a fortified position, right? And
Oh, the counter bonk. That's crazy, dude.
yeah. The decades, centuries old maneuver of the counter bonk.
He's the CEO of the Uno reverse card, dude. He said, "I'm crying. No, you're crying. I'm getting attacked. No, you're getting attacked."
Right. That's Hernan Cortez for you. You know, that's something out of history that they don't want you to know, right? So Hernan Cortez is now waiting for Pánfilo de Narváez and his allied troops sent by Moctezuma. And since he's in a fortified position, he's waiting for them. They arrive. Oh, it's a massacre. Hernan Cortez easily wins. But now that most of that army is gone, since that was the remainder of Moctezuma's army, there's no army protecting the city. So what Hernan Cortez and his army do, they just essentially walk in.
Right.
Like someone left the lights on, you just walk into the city and, well, take it over. They start razing the city and capture a bunch of the locals. And at this point, they get all these locals. They go to the Templo Mayor, which is the main temple of Tenochtitlan, where Moctezuma is hiding in. And they take all these people, surround the Templo Mayor, and start torturing them in order to get Moctezuma to cave, bend a knee, to give up, to surrender. The city to the Spanish. And this public act of torture was a way to show Moctezuma and the Aztec Empire at the time that Spanish tears were not a sign of weakness. Spanish tears are actually a sign of strength, whereas your warriors, when they cry, their cities fall. And it worked. Moctezuma gave up, and a few months later, Tenochtitlan would fall to Spanish rule, and it would continue to be Spanish rule for another 300 years.
Wow, so that was really the end of it then.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily the end. There were other insurgencies and skirmishes, like here and there, but really this was what turned the tide in the Spanish's favor.
Yeah, it's one of the definitive blows, kind of.
Right. And I mean, like, later Moctezuma would eventually be captured and killed by, like, his own people, but that's a whole deal. Well, what this is trying to say is that this moment in history is when everything changed, when Mexico finally succumbed to the rule of New Spain. Now, there's also one final writing from Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who we've been talking about, that actually writes, Mexico was not won by the cracks of rifles, but rather by the tears and sorrows of her people. And I don't know, Kurt, that just gives me goosebumps every time I hear it.
No, I'm with you. It's just, I'm over here because I'm thinking about how interesting it is to think about history being written by the victors.
Yeah.
Because really for Cortez, this is, one of his lowest points, and then a pretty bad look for him to be crying, right?
Right.
But it ends up, when it's told like this, looking like this really heroic and clever moment that he planned it all from the start.
Right.
It's just interesting to think about. I mean, well, okay, obviously one of the stories you're going to tell me today is false, but also aside from that, just in real history, what's true and what's false when history's written by the victors?
Yeah. And you know what? You really get a sense of the incredible output of emotion, right? Because you can imagine this was incredibly traumatic for these people. And this is a period in Mexican history known as the Sad Night, mostly because it shows you how some countries, some international powers some empires can rise and fall just through emotions, right? Whether they're real or they're fake.
Can I ask, is there a sense of, is it called the Sad Night because of the army crying event, or just in general because of the events that transpired? Or is it kind of both?
So the Sad Night was actually just the night when the Spanish lost, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It was just that night. However, if you say the Sad Night, there's more cultural and just subtextual implications that go from it. Yeah. Now, As with any other story, there's some real like dumb theories that come from this. Some that say that like Cortez saved the tears from these people and he would keep it in a vial that he would drink.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's dumb stuff that just
For eternal life.
right. Just kind of dumb theories that come up. I personally don't believe in those, but they're certainly circulating around. But it gives you a sense of this just joint common sense of trauma and how like Spain-Mexico relations are still a bit of an open wound, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the first story. Sorry, a little bit intense, a little bit crazy.
Yeah, that was a lot. People were crying before the genocide even happened.
Yeah, they were in a way pre-gaming the tears that would soon follow. Yeah, wild night.
Real wild weekend for Cortez. You know.
Wild weekend. Actually, this took place over like the course of a month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't just in one night.
I thought it was like 2 days, and then he's gonna wake up and wonder, like, oh, what happened? What did I do?
It's really the worst hangover in history. You just kind of black out, and next thing you know, Moctezuma's dead.
It's like the Hangover. He doesn't remember any of it. Like,
Yeah.
well, first you were crying a lot, and then we had a big battle, another battle. Then you tortured a lot of people.
And then the Aztec Empire fell.
Classic. That's a classic.
All right, so moving on to the next story, Kurt. I thought I'd stay in not only with the Aztec Mexica theme, but also I wanted to keep on with military history or warfare history of the pre-Hispanic world. All right, so
Right.
Kurt, have you ever heard about Amaquahuitl?
No, I recognize that it's a Nahuatl word. I think.
You're
But I
right.
don't-
You're so right. Wow, I've taught you so well, Kurt.
Continue the podcast. Continue the podcast.
So the Maquahuitl, it's a weapon, one of the main weapons of the pre-Hispanic world, and you've probably seen it. You've probably recognized it. Imagine some sort of sword,
Okay.
but it has obsidian blades kind of sticking out from each end.
Oh yeah, I think I have.
Yeah, you've probably recognized it. It's kind of like a baseball bat. Actually, not a baseball bat. It's more like a cricket bat. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like
Yeah.
a cricket bat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen this before.
A cricket bat that has just obsidian blades sticking out.
Yeah.
So that's the description, and just so you know, the name of it is Maquahuitl. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you say it.
Oh, thank you. That's so gracious of you.
Yeah, of course, Kurt. You're welcome.
There's just so many consonants, Luis. All together.
Yeah, a bunch of consonants together, but a bunch of vowels together. It's kind of like all the same time, you know? So, yeah, it was a very popular weapon at the time, the most popular. And we even have some reports from the Spanish that have come down to us that just describe it as an incredibly effective weapon in warfare.
The Spanish say this weapon really hurts to get hit with. Hey.
Well, you know, it's actually a little more gruesome than that, Kurt, because Bernal Díaz del Castillo, the guy we talked about earlier, he actually has an account of these weapons. He writes in his book called The True Story of the Conquest of New Spain. Here we go. He writes, their weapons were sharp blades of flint set to each opposite side of a club. And this weapon was so fierce that they claimed that this weapon could chop off a horse's head right through the neck. Now, Kurt, I know you know what a horse's neck looks like.
Horses are pretty thick, dude. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and this weapon reportedly was able to cut right through it, you know?
That's such a like strange brag
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like its primary use isn't cutting.
Right.
It's like you like blunt force just beating things with.
Right. And look, I feel the exact same way.
No, I feel like I just feel like it would have made more sense if they were like it can smash 10 watermelons or something.
Right. Yeah.
Brother, you wouldn't believe how well you could mince things with this bad boy.
Yeah, so these were very powerful weapons, right? And they were mostly used in warfare. And warfare in Mexica or pre-Hispanic times was actually not made to kill, rather to maim. So these weapons were very powerful for straight up hits. but really killing was not their forte.
Right.
And as you can imagine, if you were to hit someone hard enough, if the blade hits bone, the blade is just obsidian, so it would break and crack.
Right.
And it would not be terribly effective at cutting. Rather, you would now be left with a club. So you still have a weapon, but, you know, these are not weapons that were terribly effective once the Spanish arrived, because, of course, the Spanish, they're wearing steel armor. They're wearing armor that is not going to get so hurt by either wooden clubs or obsidian blades, right? And as I said before, the strategies for warfare in pre-Hispanic America and Mesoamerica were much different than those of Western Europe, right? In Western Europe, wars are won by the casualties you inflict, by the deaths you inflict. But here in Mesoamerica, you would maim as many people as you could, and you would capture as many people as you could. So that would show your power, your benevolence of your leaders, just how many people you could capture, right? So these weapons were not made to kill people necessarily. Now, this weapon sounds awesome, sounds badass, and surely there must be so many left around the world. But Kurt, I am sorry to burst that bubble of yours, but there are actually no maquahuitls left.
Oh.
There were actually reports of a single maquahuitl that survived the conquest of Mexico. And really quick, before I move on, I want to let you know that these weapons, these maquahuitls, come in all shapes and sizes, right? You've got your standard, like, sword length. You've also got, like, a two-handed weapon, and some of these could even be, like, 1.60 meters tall. So that's like a whole person. Like my sister, for example, is that tall.
Wow. Luis, you know I've never met your sister, right? Like I know what she looks like and I know her name, but I don't know how tall she is.
Oh, wow. Never mind. Well, for those of you listening to this episode, I'm sorry, Mariana, but you're not that tall. But
hey, quick shout out to Mariana. She's short.
Yeah, you wouldn't know that, Kurt. Anyway, so only one of these maquahuitls is said to have survived the conquest, and it was sent back to Spain by these conquistadors. And stories tell us that it ended up in the Royal Armory of Madrid as a museum piece, really. And it was there alongside, like, other pieces of armor and arms from around the world as, like I said, a museum piece. So for several hundred years, this two-handed maquahuitl was just sitting in a museum there for just the whole world to see, which is wild. Right. What's very interesting about this weapon is that as time went on and as generations went by, people started to forget what this weapon was for or who it was used by. Just this knowledge just kind of started disappearing.
Okay.
So it was really lost to time, to history books where this weapon came from. And since no one really knew where it came from or cared, really, it was kind of just vibing. So during the early 1800s, there was decided to be an exhibition to show off all the different items that the Royal Armory in Madrid had. And they infamously gathered a bunch of different mismatched pieces and decided to throw them together as just like a single set, just to see what looked the coolest. And they saw this big-ass sword, this maquahuitl, and everyone wondered where it would look the coolest. And one person, I'm assuming the intern from the back, said, "Hey guys, we have this one samurai suit armor."
Oh no.
And this was a armor, like a full head-to-toe samurai armor from like the Edo period or whatever.
Right.
And the museum essentially combined a bunch of different items. They got what seems to be a Turkish shield and then combined it with the other hand, put a sword, a 1.60 meter sword from like the Aztec Empire.
Oh no, that's it. Cancel the Madrid Museum. Stop the museum.
And reportedly, people loved it. Like, and most of the people in the early 1800s in Madrid have probably never seen any of these items.
That's
right?
true.
And so for most of those people, this is probably the only way they get to experience these items from outside their country.
Right.
And the best part is that there are reports from people visiting this museum and saying, "Oh, whoa! I can't believe they're using that tiny little shield with that big ass sword." Like it's crazy to them, right?
They didn't even get the two-handed right.
Right.
Because you said it was big enough, it should have been two-handed. They didn't even get that right.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's not even the only one. Like, there was a separate piece of armor, and they didn't have a samurai sword to give it. So what did they give it? They just gave it an Aztec spear also, you know? So now you have these two items, these two relics from the Spanish conquest of Mexico, and yet they're hanging out on just a couple of samurai, which I find hilarious. But you know, the worst part, Kurt, is that in 1884, the Royal Armory burned down.
No.
And since these two items were made of organic material, namely wood,
Right.
they did not survive the fire. They burned down with the armory. And with that fire, the last remaining weapon used in the conquest burned down in Spain, which I think is the worst part.
That's bad ending. The bad ending.
And to this day, there are no more articles, no more pieces, no more artifacts of this sword, of these maquahuitls have remained. Supposedly, stories say that there's one last one in our Museum of Anthropology, but these rumors are really unfounded. So for all we know, the very last maquahuitl burned down during the fire of 1884 in the Royal Armory in Madrid.
Wow, that's this reminds me of, it was like a callback to the Alexander the Great biography episode where we were like, it's a shame it ended up in Britain at all.
Yeah, and it reminds you of the different articles and pieces that are in different museums that are from Mexico but are around the world, right?
That's true.
Like Moctezuma's headdress is actually currently in Vienna.
Huh.
And, well, you know, there's just a bunch of these articles and artifacts in museums that are not Mexico, and they can end up in Spain.
When they had it in Madrid, did they know that it was the last one, or was it not till later that someone put the pieces together that there wasn't one in Mexico, but there was one in Madrid, and it was lost in the fire?
This was the only maquahuitl that we knew of.
Right.
This was the only one that was given to the Spanish crown as a gift.
Right.
Every other one was probably still left in Mexico and just lost in time, lost through time, because they're made of wood and sorts. But yeah, to our knowledge, this was the only one that ever survived the conquest.
Okay.
So those are the two stories for the day, Kurt. I'm sorry if they were kind of a little tragic, a little sad, but what are we Mexicans if not a people that are willing to keep going even though things are, well, messed up?
That's true. Little perseverance, actually.
Yeah, we are the train that refuses to go up that hill, no matter how steep. Living in Mexico is a bit of a Sisyphean task.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for
Deliberation. Yeah, Kurt, so those are the two stories. What do you think?
Okay, give me a little log line real quick. Remind me what we heard today.
Yeah, so, okay, the first story was the story of the creatively called Sad Night, and how Hernan Cortés flexed his military prowess by convincing an entire opposing force that he was in mourning. And the other story is the one of the last remaining piece of Aztec ancient military power lost in a fire in Spain with a samurai.
Okay. This is tough. You know, one thing I've been thinking about recently is that the kind of like the secret of why it's so hard to guess which is true and which is fake is when you have two stories that are both unbelievable, you get so lost in the stories, you forget to think about, is this believable or not? The first one definitely feels really believable, like I said before, in that it feels like history written by the victors. But both of them feel pretty real. It's always tough.
It's always the hardest part, Kurt.
Tough.
Yeah.
Okay.
This always terrible.
I'm gonna say I can't really put my finger on what it is. It's something intangible, but somehow the crying story, the "It's my conquest, I'll cry if I want to" story, feels a little realer to me.
Okay.
Than the last Obsidian story. So I think that the Cortez Montezuma crying story, the Sad Night, is true.
All right, Kurt, you have decided that the Sad Night story is indeed the real one, and the Maquahuitl obsidian sword lost in a fire is fake, and I regret to inform you, Kurt, that you're wrong!
Oh, no!
The Maquahuitl was indeed lost in a fire in 1884 in a museum in Spain after being posed as the sword of a samurai. Now, I'm also happy to inform you that for the other story, there was indeed a sad night in Mexico.
There is a sad night. There's a sad night.
And it was also just as uncreatively named. And what it refers to is the night that Hernan Cortez lost a big battle, one of his biggest battles, I think the only big battle that he ever lost during his conquest of Mexico, and reportedly he sat down under a tree and cried. But right. That's the only real part of the story. Everything else was made up. But that's it. That's all that's in history books. It's just that he went under a tree and he cried. And like I said, the only reason it's really significant, it's because it was the only real big battle that Hernan Cortez ever lost. And it's so significant, actually, to Mexican history that the tree where he supposedly sat down under and cried is actually still there in Mexico City, right in the middle of like a couple streets.
Oh, that's interesting.
And of course, there's no good way to know.
Right.
Right. But, you know, it's really fun to think that that's where he could have sat down. And the tree has been dated, and it is over 500 years old.
It's been identified as the tree, whether it was or not. Yeah.
Yeah. There's even a little fence around it.
Yeah.
Around the tree. But it's since at the time it was just in a field, and now it's in the middle of like a big residential area in Mexico City. It's just like street, residential area, tree, street.
Okay, so let me ask you, because I didn't want to probe you on this too much before, but okay, so the thinking is that when they had the sword in the Madrid armory, they still knew what it was at that point in time. So did they knowingly put it with the wrong cultural things, or was it not until after? Did they not know what it was at that point, and then after the fact they realized, oh, this was the last one, but it's gone now?
Yeah, the thought is kind of like I told you, that the whole identification of this item was lost to time, just because a lot of time had gone on. And there's speculation on whether or not they knew what it was or not, or they just thought it looked cool. But this is the early 1800s or before. There really wasn't a lot of academic rigor. Right. Or like archaeological, integrity. So the fact that they grouped it with like a Turkish shield and stuff like that,
right.
It just goes to show that we're not terribly sure, and they didn't really care. It's really also very neat, too, that there are actually images that exist of this exhibit, the samurai exhibit. So I'm going to send you a picture of it,
okay,
Kurt, and I want you to describe to me what it looks like.
I don't know why this is funny, but it's so much skinnier than I was expecting.
But as you can see, it's two-handed weapon, long-ass weapon.
Yeah. The weapon is going out of frame.
Yeah, and it's held by a samurai, a very recognizable samurai armor.
It does, what's interesting? It does go together better than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be really jarring. But if you didn't know any better, yeah, you could possibly believe that all these things are meant to be together. Do they know why there were none that were preserved? I mean, did they switch to different weapons, or was it just kind of something that no one thought about?
Yeah, I think it's because mostly they're made of organic material, like namely wood.
Right. They didn't survive the test of time very well.
Yeah, they didn't survive like actual weather. I think there might be some artifacts or some like scraps and pieces of Macuahuitls left, but the only full
Right.
one, the only complete one was the one that burned down in Spain.
Man, could be nice for home defense. I'm from rural Missouri, where the go-to home defense is you got your double barrel, your grandpa's double barrel shotgun by your bed just in case. But if I broke into someone's house and they came at me with the old Makwa whittle, I'm out of there, dude. I don't know what they're about, but they're way more serious than I am.
Yeah, immediately out of that house.
Could be nice to still have a few lying around. I don't know.
So, Kurt, I'm afraid that brings us up to the tally, the famous tally of correct guesses of real stories to fake. And now the tally is up 4-1, Kurt, with me in the lead.
Man, I'm bleeding points over here, dude. It's getting dire.
Yeah, man.
And you know what else? This was kind of both of our ideas for this podcast. I think I was the one who initiated the idea.
Yeah.
I feel like I've set myself up for failure. Maybe I put myself in the ring with a bull that I'm not ready for. You're kind of tearing me apart over here, Luis.
I mean, Kurt, hey, didn't we say it a couple of episodes ago that we needed to bring more smoke, more mirrors into these episodes?
That's true.
Yeah, at this point, I'm just fully made of smoke.
That's true.
And mirrors. I'm the smoke monster from Lost.
Covered in obsidian.
Yeah, just covered in jewelry. And I'm not planning on stopping anytime soon, Kurt. So this is an invitation for you to amp it up, really, for the future.
I know. Oh, just you wait, Luis. There's all this anger inside me. I'm ready to bring it with a vengeance next time.
Oh, thank God. Can't wait.
I got to do something. Something's got to give, dude.
Something does have to give. So with those two stories, we will wrap up today's episode. What do you think? Were you able to catch the real story? Were you able to catch the fib? Were you as good as Kurt or as bad as Kurt? Let us know. You can find us on our Instagram at UnbelievablePod. There you can find some behind the scenes pic, all of our links, and maybe some pictures of just us two. Although, who knows? Maybe you want to keep that a mystery. You don't want to know what our faces look like yet.
No, we're handsome. Come on, Luis. Give us some credit.
That's true. That's true. Well, also on our Instagram, you can find us on all your different favorite listening platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast. Make sure to tune in next time when Kurt takes over and tries to fool me with one of his stories. Will he be able to do it? Who knows? You'll have to check it out next week. Until then, thank you for listening to Unbelievable. See ya.
Bye, y'all.